Welcome to the Consultant's Way podcast. I'm Dean McMann, one of your hosts.
And I'm Anthony Paluska. In each episode, we explore the world of consulting professional services through case studies, our own experiences, and interviews with industry leaders.
We're focused on improving individual skills and improving business practices and improving the success of the consulting business.
I think you'll enjoy what we have in store today.
Hey, thanks for everybody joining us. And as you know, we have a series of focusing on important consultant executives across our industry. And today we are very lucky and excited to have Alpesh Patel with us. Alpesh is, I was just saying this morning when talking about Alpesh, he's one of the few people who has just had such a wealth of experience across major jobs and in beginning practices and driving them kind of across the board. Alpesh, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you, Dean. Appreciate the opportunity. So I'm a CPA by background, but I've been in the services and technology and then software space for over 20 years. And across those years, I've had an opportunity to work across different areas of the business, but mainly in the professional services, consulting, and delivery side. So had the opportunity to really drive outcomes for our clients and delivering what we've committed to, and then really helping to build out teams, our delivery models and our services teams over both onshore and offshore. So really driving and honing in that operating model for a lot of our in the technology space. So really that's been my experience, and I love that sort of opportunity to sort of grow and mentor teams, and then being able to then really get intimate with the client to understand where their pain points are and how can I and the team and the company help to solve those issues for them.
Yeah, and Alpesh, one of the things we love about our opportunity today is your experience globally making these kinds of decisions and driving the kind of outcomes that a lot of people are. The first time they work in a global job is when they get the job. And we're looking forward to the kind of hints and allegations you can give us. Any
No, I agree. I know the topic we're going to dive into today is around how we scale professional services and some of your experience and best practices associated with that at organizations that are at different stages of that. That as we all know, right? That's different if you're doing it very locally or domestically versus trying to do something like that globally. The complexities of that just become multiplied there and exponential. So looking forward to your experience and your guidance there.
Yeah. So tell us, your 30,000 foot level view on what's most important there.
I think most important to me is making sure that the organization and the measures that they have, the internal KPIs or the external KPIs they hit the street with, where everybody's aligned and everybody's contributing to that, right? And what I mean by that is obviously one of the big KPIs is growth, growing ARR, growing MR in the SaaS world. But what are the next levels and layers down, right? And how do the internal teams and functions align to those? So is sales aligned? Is services aligned? Is support aligned? Are all their metrics all tied together so you're all driving to the right outcomes and you're not driving, if the sales is on a different sheet of paper or have a different set of measures, and then delivery or support of professional services or client success is on a different one, then you're going to have a constant battle trying to drive. And then this gets in front of the client, right? As far as the experience, because you have two functions that are moving in opposite directions. So to me, number one is making sure that the KPIs or all of those measures that you're using, everybody's aligned and everybody has a common KPI that ties them all together to hit that main KPI.
Yeah, and let's stay there a second. I think we do global global PS transformations all the time. I don't think that's normal. I think normally where you start with them and where we start with them is they're not aligned. They don't see the integrated value, and it's a big effort to get this. So what have you done, or what's your experience getting that I think you just finished a global 3 year where one of the biggest problems was alignment.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. What are some of the best practices to enable, force, hold accountable that alignment?
Great question. So, in my experience, especially with the sales organization, is obviously speed, getting the deal cycle shorter. Right. That's what they're focused on. Right. And so, for me, from a services perspective, how do we help enable that? And so, what I've done in the past to bring some of that alignment together is traditionally in services, we've always been in a time and material model. And what I've done is done a hybrid where I've rolled out the initial sort of consulting or implementations as a fixed fee and given guardrails and definitions to say if your opportunity is within these guardrails from a services perspective, then guess what? It's fixed fee. You don't have to worry about coming back and asking for deal reviews or risk reviews and all that. If it stays within these parameters, this is the fixed fee that we'll provide. And what I've found is that helps the sales team to make things a lot easier. It makes a lot of things to understand and clear to the client, right? Because hey, this is what we're going to provide, this is when we're going to deliver it, how we're going to deliver it, when and why, and here's the fixed fee. And then what I've also done, and as I mentioned earlier, is a hybrid. So as I've deployed the initial solution, if the client is interested in further I want to say customization or modifications or enhancements to the solution, then that becomes more of a traditional time and material where you have to scope that out. But what I've done to get alignment, especially with the sales team, is to say, how can I help facilitate their sales cycle? And then part of that is going to more of a fixed fee methodology.
When you mentioned fixed fee, our kind of approach is if we can get them doing writing a check, doing something fixed fee that is, as you said, definable rule. We like that to be small, so I'd like you to respond to that. And the second question is, when you talk about time and materials, you're really working off, I'm guessing, an estimate, but you're giving yourself freedom to expand it based on their doing their job and unknown factors. You're not really just doing an unlimited time and materials, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So going back to your first part, on the fixed fee, I wouldn't say small, Dean. I would say well defined, right?
Okay.
Here's our standard. Here's what we deliver. Here's what the standard looks like that we're going to help you to deploy, and we're going to get the client and the customer to use the solution faster, right? Adoption.
Yes.
And then on the back end, as you said, and you hit it on the head, right? Is if there is an opportunity to continue with optimization or further deployment or customization or modifications, then you do it as another scoping exercise. And again, it to your point, take all the lessons learned in the initial deployment, understand where some of the challenges the client has. Maybe it's lack of resources, maybe it's lack of time, right? And then you're able to scope that, but it's going to be more tuned to their what the current situation circumstance, so that scoping isn't going to be this, but it's going to be more refined. And I think you'll see that clients are more receptive to that, where you're not just approaching it and saying, okay, well, I'm throwing everything in the kitchen sink. I'm actually learned what I deployed, and here's an additional time and material. So the client has a better outcome or a better experience with that.
Yeah, as you get to know them and lower your risk and lower their risk because we understand them.
Exactly.
So back to your original alignment. So one thing you've said is, hey, let's make it easy on sales. Absolutely. What else is important in getting that critical alignment?
I think not just for sales, but also our delivery and our support team, right? So if we've got a well-defined methodology, fixed fee, what it forces us to do is make sure that we have all of our steps, tasks, deliverables, owners, when we're going to do it, why we're going to do it, who's going to do it, all of that's defined. It's standard, right? And so any one of the things you can then do is scale your team. So if you have a very prescriptive, structured implementation plan, process, methodology, you are able to then bring people in and out of that implementation as needed. So if all of a sudden you're into this an engagement, and all of a sudden you realize you need some additional experts because there was something you didn't plan for or whatnot. You can bring that person in or persons into that role, and in addition, that person may not have to be on site because again you've got a standard process that's well defined and structured, so anybody that can come in can say, oh yes, we're at step 5, I know steps 1 through 4 were
Right.
done,
Right.
I'm at
Right.
step 5, if I complete this one, then the next person can take 6 with confidence to know that they can step in at 6 and then take the project through completion. So that's one, and then the other one is support. So if you think about it, once you've handed off the client to steady state support, support becomes easier because again, defined standards, we've deployed something that's standard, it's not custom. So if a issue arises in the current environment, support can go support it. They're not coming back to the delivery or the professional services team and saying, wait a second, this client's opened up a ticket or a case, I don't understand what this is, what did you do, you need to go fix it. So now it takes time back off of off the professional services team. So it all enables the team and the organization to be more efficient, effective, and really driving the right outcomes for the client.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you at the beginning of that you mentioned that the alignment goes beyond just sales, and we do want to come back to the conversation around both repeatability of process and methodology, so that we can scale this and add resources and just grow the team that way, and then the support model. But the thing we see all the time, and curious how you've worked through this in other scenarios, is that it's often not commonly understood, or a shared opinion is not understood across the organization as to what the strategic role professional services is really trying to play within the organization. So in some cases, organizations, the PS leader or even the broader business might think PS is there as a revenue generating engine. Others might think it's there to drive product pull through. Others are there to increase adoption and stickiness of our software product. Sometimes it's a margin optimization, and you can really only
Sometimes it's given away,
yeah, which helps with the product pull through or some of the adoption,
or not,
or
but yeah,
not
in their own minds, yeah,
theoretically.
yeah.
But the and we found you can only really optimize for one and a half of those at any given time, and then your strategy is driven off of that. And if there's a disconnect there, we have sales that are trying to give it away, but we are being held accountable as a PS organization to a margin target, and it creates friction. So if you don't mind, if you've got some experience with how you've worked through that alignment, that'd be very helpful.
Yeah, no, you're spot on, right? Is that as the companies change or tweak their goals as they mature, they're going to focus on different areas, right? And so for me, as from a services standpoint, the way I've helped to drive some of that or navigate or move is to say, okay, it's a great opportunity to again get further alignment. And so what I've helped to do in those situations is to say, okay, as we're at this stage, the services team can then help you focus to enable to execute this objective. So if for example, you mentioned it, product adoption, right? How do we get product adoption to for the client? Well, from a professional services team, if the product team's focus is around driving adoption, well, as I mentioned earlier, well, how does services teams help to drive that? Well, one is to deploy the standard, right? To get the client to start using the solution or the product quickly. And so, what we're from a services team is to say, okay, I'm going to deploy X, and I'm only going to deploy X as our initial engagement. I'm not going to deploy anything outside of that unless it's a separate engagement. With the sales team on that example, we will then go through what was like a deal review as an example, right? And say, okay, sales team, well, let's review this opportunity. The client's asking for X. They're not asking for our standard. What are the risks? Are we all willing to take that risk? Are we willing to take some margin off of the services team because it requires some additional investment or some time? So we try to get buy-in initially along our deal review cycle to make sure that those parameters are all accepted by everyone, right? So if I'm measured on revenue and margins, but I have an opportunity to review the deals. We get sign off internally, and everybody across the organization, all the stakeholders, sales, support, product, we're all on the same page and buying off and saying, yes, we're going to make an investment. Services is probably not going to make as much as they do on a standard deployment or rollout, but we are willing to make the investment here, and making sure that that's documented, right? As you do your reviews, financial reviews, you look at the metrics, the financial metrics. Everybody understands. Well, wait a second, why is services off this quarter or this year? Well, we had a few deals that we decided to make an initial investment, and services is going to take a little bit of a less margin for those particular opportunities.
And you can project that out for them. Also, there's some gap uh, revenue recognize, questions that we don't have time for today. But let's take it up in the organization above the departments, and let's talk about alignment again. Alignment with the C-suite for them to your point with Anthony. What is our mission? Or, you mentioned, as an example, you mentioned upsells. So clearly, where you've been, there's more than just implement the product. But so just take it up and say, what's your experience getting the overall organization? One thing a friend of mine always does is they won't take the job unless they have all those agreements written down. But you don't always have that freedom.
Yeah. No, I think there should always be, my philosophy at at the level up is everybody should be selling, right? Whether you're in services, whether you're in delivery, whether you're in support, you're at the end of the day are selling. Whether you really are,
Alpesh, you cannot say that enough.
yeah.
You can never say
You
that
can
enough.
never say enough.
Because
You
it's
can
not
never
just
sell it.
selling, it's moving the client down the road, driving them. All those are sales techniques, right?
Those are,
Yeah.
those absolutely, and what at the end of the day, the services team is, I like to call it, the tip of the spear to execute the overall company strategy, right? And you have the ability to treat the services team either as a enabler, and it's not 100% revenue generating, but there should be metrics where services teams are measured on some growth, upsell, cross sell, all those kind of things, right? So you're always looking for driving additional enhancements, right? If the product team is rolling out new enhancements, new solutions, we may decide that, hey, as part of a rollout or part of the adoption strategy in the company, we may have the services team go deploy that and not even charge the client, right? And that will get the client really starting to drive, at the end of the day, adoption. Happy customers buy more, and that's really
Also,
where.
that drives intimacy with the PS organization, which is a different intimacy than anybody else in the organization because they actually interface with the client driving change, right? So
Correct.
that earlier, I mean, giving stuff away always makes me sweat, but the faster we can get our PS people in there solving problems, provided they know how to do their job and all that stuff, I think that's a real win.
That's correct. You're right, Dane. The services team usually has the most contact or the most time with the client, depending on the solution, the timeline of deployment, and all of that, right? So it's really less with the sales team because maybe, let's say, the deal cycle is pretty quick or is fairly robust and standard, but really where the time spent is really with your services team. That's where they're either on site, they're spending most of the time with the client. They get to know the client. They get to know the culture, the
Right.
different folks, right? Building those relationships. And so it is. We have, sometimes the organization has to sort of see where they are and who's spending the time, and saying, oh, you know what, our services team spends the most time with our clients. Let's build out some sort of operating model that enables those folks to build out deep, meaningful relationships. And it's fine that you hand that off to support, but they will always have that relationship. And then guess what? As the client is maturing, as they're adopting more of your solution, as they become more of an advocate for your solution, they, the services team, they will remain, those contacts will remain with the services team. And sometimes what I've seen, not sometimes, but a lot of times, I see the sales team come back to the services team and say, hey, I'm working on a new opportunity, or I'm working with an existing client with a new opportunity. I'd like to have Fred or Susie, who was involved in that relationship, come back to be engaged in as part of the pre-sales to get the client to buy in, right? There's nothing more successful when a client says, I love your product, but I want to talk to your consultant who was here 2 years ago. Is he still
Absolutely.
around? I'd like to
Yeah,
understand where the
absolutely.
solution's going,
Yeah,
right?
and if we can get our accounts to do the right kind of both communication plan, and you know our model on that, the three levels between what am I doing now, what's my upsell, what's my executive strategy, and account plans that are integrated and lengthy, if you account journeys, then that becomes natural, and we get this teaming between the trusted advisor and consulting and the salespeople, and that's a journey because salespeople live on comp plans, and they've got to feel like that we're all going in the right direction.
Yeah, you touched on it there. The key word, trusted advisor, right? I think sometimes companies and teams and functions, they start very siloed and focused to get into, they get into this habit of transactional.
Absolutely.
And I think culturally, I think companies have to understand that it this the initial sale might be transactional, but you've got to quickly start focusing on getting it to more of a trusted advisor, because you want that client to stay with you over the life of your over the life, right? As long as they're here, and you want your clients to be advocates for you and promoting your product and showing up in different forums to say, hey, this solution works, we had this problem, we worked with this organization and they helped to drive the outcomes that we were doing, right? And I think you touched on it right there, is that always, if it's transactional, that's fine, no issues, but culturally and as a culture, you got to get to that point where, how do I get this to be more of a trusted advisor, trusted relationship?
Yeah, there's no easier way, as you just said, no easier way to make money, no easier way to really help them is we're trusted. And that trust does not normally come through the sales organization only because of the way they have to focus their activities. They're not going to be there day in, day out solving problems where the PS organization is. So
Right.
one thing you've said, and Anthony, I'd like your thought on this, is you have made it very clear that we own in PS getting that alignment. We own how we structure it. We own winning the hearts of the sales, or we own getting ourselves into deal reviews. That's a really refreshing approach because often we hear, I can't be successful because they're not aligned. But you've made it clear that this is our job. And I think that's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're spot on, right? It is, how do you enable the sales team to be successful from a services standpoint? How do you enable the 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 support team to be successful? How do you enable the product, right? So I see this as a very simple operating model. You start at the top with product, make great products that clients, companies desire and want. You have marketing, then you have the sales team, then you got your professional services and delivery, then you got your support and client success team, and then you come back to the product team. If you get all of those functions integrated and talking to each other and aligned, and I don't have to, I don't want to come here and say you have to force alignment through KPIs and metrics. But if you can get culturally the teams aligned to say, hey, here's where I'm struggling. Here's why I can't deploy as quickly as I can. Because if you do this or do that or tweak that, I can then maybe lower my costs. I can deliver this faster. It's really just driving the right outcomes for everybody and making sure that everybody understands each other, where they are on that journey with the client and how they enable that journey. And if you can get everybody just communicating on a regular basis, that is a start right there, right?
Yeah. And you've alluded to this a couple of times. And the professional services leader, as you were talking about, has such a critical role to play because you're balancing two separate things simultaneously. One is you have a team full of people that can bridge the gap and be the glue between a couple of those functions that may not be operating where they need to be given where they are in their maturity curve. So the professional services team could play the trusted advisor role to support an account management and a sales effort. They also, as they create things to make the product work in areas where it has some gaps or deficiencies, they also end up playing a support role. And so they wear a bunch of different hats to help bridge that gap, but defining where those lines get drawn between those different functions as the leader, and knowing and having the agility to go back and forth and say, now it's not effective or efficient for us to play that role because of what we need to do to scale this business and where that function has grown. That's a pivot on how we need to get our team to operate and some of the operating procedures we need to be have in place for the professional services organization to make sure we're handing things off at the appropriate time at the end of an engagement or examples like that. But that's a delicate balance that you have to work on a regular basis to account for all of those.
Yeah, and I think you'd agree with this, Alpesh. And you know, this is our mission for why we do all this is for them to be adroit and mobile in that transition and at the client side. You know, it's like I was watching a baseball game last night, and when the second baseman got the ball, they knew what to do. Right in that moment, they knew I'm going to take it to second, or I'm going to take it to first, or I'm going to do a double play, or I'm going to throw it home, whatever. That's what we believe. PS has to be so well indoctrinated into the principles and the whys and the hows, so they can play that role and become that trusted advisor. And I know you believe that. You might talk a moment on the Anthony's. You know, how does that transition work, and what do I expect from my people?
Yeah, it's you guys have touched on it, right? The professional service is a great role to be in because you're touching every aspect of the business and the operating model. Everything, right? From helping in sales execution, top line revenue growth, to execution of the bottom line margins and profitability, but then also delivery. You're also feeding back in to the product team key insights and information to say, hey, here's where we're struggling. Here's what the product is should be doing or could be doing. If you tweak this, I can reduce whatever level of effort by X amount or X dollars and whatnot. But I think the services role is a is a combination of all of the C level roles all in one. And you have to really,
Yeah,
at the end of the
yeah.
day, understand the business. You have to understand what it takes to sell and how services is included as a value add to that. But then also, that's great. But then how do you make sure that the company is optimizing services? Because you can't answer or you can't solve revenue or margin or issues by just throwing more professional services bodies at it. That's an expensive proposition,
And
right?
and you hate to do that if we're having to do that because we're not good enough,
Yeah.
right? It's bad enough to do it because we have a product problem or we have but if it's us, I mean, that's kind of unforgivable. So listen, this has been great. Take us through what's the one thing you want us to remember about this, scaling in a complex global environment?
Scaling in a complex, yeah, it's all about standards. It's all about getting the client to adopt and where can I continue to optimize my team? Where can I take the services team who initially come in to deploy or implement, but then move them up a level to become more trusted advisors where you can start generating and driving more intimacy with the client? Those are the things that are really the takeaways as you drive your services organization.
That's great. Listen, Alpesh, thank you so much. I just want to tell you a couple of things we were able to take away and maybe give everybody, something to do. So I loved again that you made it our responsibility. I love that you took a long term point of view that I'm going to keep working these issues until we align. I'm not going to be able to demand alignment because I'm not product where all these people came from, right? But I'm going to force it by communication and activities and making things better and adjusting us. I love that. I love that you're one of the few people that have done this multiple times across the globe and all the different, problems and groups. And, this group doesn't trust corporate. That group doesn't believe it will work in France because, that's the normal thing. So, and I think a takeaway for me that I would now share with everybody is don't let this be your hindrance. Make it your objective. Make it the thing you work every day. Alignment is the way out. It is long, and you've said this several times, is we do our job, right? Getting alignment and failing is worse than not having alignment, right? So
Yeah.
we own the responsibility of fix feeing where we need to. We own the responsibility of building good people, making sure that you had a great example. We're so good at this. If I have to get an expert and a SME in from something else, I should be able to do that without missing a date or missing my budget. Right. So my takeaway is you can beat this, you can win it, but you got to work at it and make it one of your 2 or 3 key objectives and communicate about it.
Yep.
Yeah, and
Exactly.
my biggest takeaway from this, in addition to those, or maybe even reinforcing one, is in order for us to scale our professional services business to the way we need others to play their part, but we own the responsibility of playing a role
Amen.
in supporting them, both in how do we get sales activated and with offerings that are easy for them to sell and support them from a team selling perspective, and how do we make sure we have consideration for support organization and what happens after we leave an engagement on how we're going to maintain it, or else we get pulled back in and we can't play our role of supporting
Yeah,
that particular client.
that's right.
So in order for us to be successful, we have to keep an eye on how to make the other functions within our organization successful.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.